All right, good morning, everybody. Great to see all of y'all here on the live studio recording of the Jew Curious Show podcast. And so today it's going to be an episode that goes straight to the podcast. We are doing the Parashat Hashavua. Let me just make sure I've got all my pipes connected here on the internet. Today's recording, the recording of today's live event will go into the podcast, episode number 33. Been kind of quiet on the podcast this week. Lots of preparations for Purim and things like that. Lots of costume time and a little bit of celebratory time as well. Purim's not one of those holidays where it's like Shabbat and you can't do anything except, enjoy the holiday itself. You can work, you can do other things. However, I decided to fully revel in it this year. I had a costume. My costume was a Hawaiian pig, I think. I don't know what you'd call that. We had a Purim spiel that was based on the Disney movie Moana, and I played the role of Pua, who was an advisor to the king, who was also a pig-like creature. And so people may have thought it seemed odd to see the rabbi dressed in a lei and a grass skirt and a kind of Hawaiian punch guy hat and a pig snout. However, if you're not going to see something odd on Purim, you're doing it wrong. So just want to jump into the chat here. For people just tuning in, we are going to be talking about the Parashat Hashavua today. That is Parashat Tzav. And I just want to give a shout out to all my homies on this channel. We've got Susan is here. The costumes and the food were awesome. My first Purim, it was terrific. Susan, that's so awesome. First Purim is always an interesting experience for people because you don't often see people all dressed in costumes and having big festive things. Sometimes the synagogue is kind of a dull place. I'm saying this about a place that I love, but sometimes it could be a little bit like, quiet and meditative and introspective. But Purim there's a little bit of introspection going on at Purim, but Purim is anything but quiet and calm and sedate. I'll say that, at least not, the beginning part of the night. We've got Curtis coming in from Louisiana today, and let's see, Susan and Ruthie and Higa Girl Steph. Let's see, Ruthie. Let's see what else is going on here. Tell me the strangest Purim costume, or maybe the funniest Purim costume that you saw. Edith Castro, shalom from New York. Lashem gives you a great Shabbat shalom. Excited about that. We got Curtis. We've got Edith. We've got Steph is here. And in just a minute, we're going to start with my podcasty voice of the intro to the Jew Curious Show podcast. I don't have many things that I'm good at, but I am good at voiceover work. So if this whole rabbi thing doesn't work out. So we're going to jump right into it. And today, once again, we're talking about Parashat Tzav. This is a live studio recording of the Jew Curious Show podcast. And so I'll set up with some intro commentary, give the name of the episode, the show notes, say thank yous. So if you feel like I'm ignoring you in the live chat, it's like this isn't a radio show, this is just us hanging out. It's both. It's us hanging out and it's a radio show. So here we go. Hero, I don't know about you, but life has thrown its share of challenges at me. Overall, I've had a pretty privileged life, but there have been some ups and downs. And I am where I am today and who I am today, not because of the number of times that I've fallen, but the number of times that I have gotten back up again. And I think the same is probably true for you, or can be true for you, if you can look at life's challenges as opportunities for growth and even gratitude. And we'll talk more about that and Parashat Tzav right after this bass. A little pause for the intro music there. Clear out the pipes with some rocket fuel here. All right. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Joey Weissenberg and the Hadar Ensemble for those inspiring opening beats. Thank you to my live studio audience here on YouTube Live, where we're recording this episode of the Jew Curious Show podcast right this very instant. And most of all, thank you, Hero, for listening to the Jew Curious Show. If this is your first time here, or maybe your second or third time here and you haven't yet taken advantage of this opportunity, I highly suggest that you subscribe to the Jew Curious Show on the podcast platform of your choice. Most of these things, let's say if you're listening on your smartphone, they have a little button or a picture of a button that you can tap and subscribe. The benefit of this is that you're not only listening to this show, but you automagically download all future episodes, and you have immediate instant access to the entire archive of the 30 plus shows that we've done so far. So if you haven't yet subscribed to the show, I highly recommend you pick one of those up. Just tap the little button on your phone or on your podcast listening device, and we will be all set. It requires no further work from you to get all the rest of the Jew Curious Show episodes. Another quick PSA. What is a PSA? Let me back that up. That's the other thing about live recordings is the people here in the studio audience get to hear all of it, including the bogeys and the burps and the bleeps and all the things that I'll edit out later, and might hear me being repetitive and redundant sometimes. But this is how the sausage is made. So that's part of the benefit of the live studio audience. Another thing you might consider doing. Back that up. One other thing I want to mention before we get into the show. I was reminded by a good friend, colleague, and teacher of mine, Rabbi Ron Goldberg, who is a rabbi at the Jewish Home for the Aging here in Los Angeles. Swell guy, my schoolmate all through rabbinical school, and a great personal friend. But I also call him my teacher because he's taught me so much about life, about how to be a rabbi, about how to be a mensch. No better example of that in my life of, we'll say, menschlichkeit than Rabbi Ron Goldberg. And he reminded me today by sending me a picture that today is the 1-year anniversary of the release of my first book, The Promised Life. And if you want to know more about that, if you want to know more about that, you can go to jewcurious.show/book. If you're watching here in the YouTube, every once in a while you'll see on the screen rabbijohncarrier.com/book. That takes you straight to Amazon. You can read all about it. But let me just tell you about it for a second. What I decided to do when I wrote my first book, was to take the very best of Judaism in my own personal life. And I came up with a list of 7 things, which I call 7 gifts of the Jewish tradition. These are practices, spiritual disciplines, opportunities to take up. But in my life, they really have been gifts. I unwrapped them. I was delighted by them. Sometimes I had to read the instructions a little bit more before I could play with them, just like back in the day getting gifts as a child. But these are 7 gifts from the Jewish tradition that have profoundly changed my life, for the better, I'll say. And in that book, I explain these 7 gifts. I tell you my own personal story of how they applied to my life, and I give you some practical, how-to, step-by-step ways to apply these gifts in your own life. And to be 100% clear, this is not just a book for Jewish people, right? Or even just Jew-curious people. This is a book that these are gifts that anyone can apply to their life for significant personal growth, human connection, meaning, and joy. So check that out at jewcurious.show/book. Learn a little bit about it. You can get it in Kindle. You can get it in paperback. You can get it in hardback. And I've recently been inspired to begin recording the audiobook. So stay tuned for that. If you like the cut of my jib, if you like the sound of my voice, you can soon hear a significant portion of my life story, as well as practical tips for you to unwrap these gifts in your own life for a life of greater meaning, greater joy, greater human connection, and personal growth. So with that, I want to go to the live studio audience here, see who is joining us in the chat. And today we have Susan Bird, who was experiencing Purim for the first time, said costumes and the food were awesome. And everybody's giving a big shout. This is what I love about this community. Susan weighs in before I even have a chance to respond. Ruthie and Steph and Kathy, everybody's giving a high five to Susan for her first Purim. I see Curtis Brown on the show from Louisiana. Welcome, Curtis. And let's see, Edith Castro, shalom from New York. We got a New Yorker in here. I'm not making fun of anybody. That's actually more of a Boston accent, I think. But I am a redneck at heart. So let's see. Well, let me clarify that. I grew up in Texas and West Virginia, which means I speak both redneck and hillbilly fluently. And it's not an insult, I don't think. I wouldn't be insulted if anybody called me either a redneck or a hillbilly. These are people whom I deeply love and whose values, many of these values I cherish as well. We've got Grycicle here from the winter wonderland of Idlewild, which is slowly melting. It's hard to see spring come in sometimes when the snow is so beautiful, and yet it's necessary. And there's also nice things about spring, I'll say. We're getting into Passover season pretty soon, a spring holiday. Let's see. We got Teresa here from Cyprus. Always glad to have somebody from a Mediterranean island tuning in to this show, and not just any somebody, but Teresa has been a great supporter of our work here in the Jewish. Teresa has been a great supporter of our work here in the Jew Curious community and a delightful community member as well. So looks like we've made Minyan. We've got we got more than 10 people watching right now, which is delightful. So let's go ahead and jump into our Torah study. And I always like to begin Torah study, and not just me, I didn't make this up. It's a custom to begin Torah study with a bracha, with a blessing. Anytime we're engaging in a mitzvah, either whether you see that as a good deed or a commandment that God gave us, anytime we undertake something like this, it's appropriate to say a blessing, to acknowledge our source of all blessing with gratitude for improving our lives, elevating, distinguishing our lives with these mitzvot, including the specific mitzvah of Torah study. So I like to start Torah study with this blessing. If you know it, say it along with me, or say Amen at the end. If you're watching in the live studio audience, feel free to type Amen into the chat, and I will know you are there, and this mitzvah will apply to you as well. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is God, the source of all of our blessings, the sovereign of the universe, the creator of all that is good, the creator of all that sustains us, who sets our lives on a higher level with commandments, including the commandment to engage in Torah study, which we are doing right now. All right, let's do this. So we are in Parashat Tzav. And I say we're in Parashat Tzav. Again, if this is the first time you're watching, God bless you, welcome. You don't need a whole lot of Jewish knowledge to go ahead and jump into what we're doing. I like to do this in a way that everybody can access it, but also share some deep Torah as well for the people who've been studying for a while. Part of the Jewish custom is to read a portion of the Torah every single week, and I've released a couple of these podcast episodes, so hopefully you're hip to the program. But if you are not, we have a weekly assigned reading, if you will. We are on what theologians or ecclesiologists call a fixed lectary, which means everybody in the Jewish world is reading the same reading on a given week, right? So if you go to any synagogue in the world tomorrow, on Saturday morning, when they do the Torah service, we will all be reading the same thing, right? And this is Parashat Tzav. This is the second Torah portion of Sefer Vayikra, or the book of Leviticus. And the word Tzav in the name just comes from one of the first words in the Parsha, which is commanded, right? God commanded Moses and Aaron to undertake certain things in the holy service. The book of Leviticus is the book of Leviticus is sometimes called Sefer Kedoshim, like it's the priest's code, or the holiness code part of it, or the Sefer Kohanim. And so a lot of Leviticus is, let's say, rules and sometimes recipes, right? They're talking about animal sacrifices and grain sacrifices and bread that you're supposed to wave around and put on the altar and things like that. So this runs the risk of getting very dry for some people. And I know I've had that experience myself and talking to my students and friends that people kind of tune out a little bit sometimes when we get to the book of Leviticus, because unlike the grand sweeping narrative of cosmology that appears in the beginning of Genesis, or this really nuanced and intricate family drama that unfolds in the rest of Genesis, or this incredible tale of redemption that begins the book of Exodus, right now in Leviticus, there's a lot of do this, don't do that, right? Eat this, don't eat that. Celebrate at this time, not at that time. Priests have to dress this way, not that way. They can touch this thing, they can't touch that thing. A lot of do's and don'ts. For some people, this sort of reads like Hoyle's rules of card games. And so it challenges us to delve into these practices from very long ago, which we legit can't even do today because we don't have a Mishkan, we don't have a temple, we don't do sacrifices anymore. And so what's the value of reading about sacrifices, which kind of bother people anyway? You got a lot of vegans watching this show right now, or we got a lot of vegans listening to the show right now, and they're like, ew, animal killing for blood, that's really how you get close to God, really? Okay. But can we delve into these things and find lessons that teach us how to live our lives today better? And I'm taking it on faith that we can. I'm kind of in the faith business. So I'm going to accept the challenge to look into stories of sacrifices and priestly behavior and see what we can learn. So we got Spencer here. Thank you for joining us, Spencer. And we got so many people coming in. And yes, thank you, as Greisigal points out. Parashat Tzav is Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1 to chapter 8, verse 36. It's pretty much all of chapters 6, 7, and 8. That's the Parsha that we are reading from. And the part that I want to focus on today, and we begin talking about different kinds of sacrifices. We have an olah, which is a burnt offering. We have a hatat, which is sometimes called the sin offering. When we make a mistake, and we need to show up and somehow repair that mistake. We have so that's the chatat. We have the asham, which is a guilt offering, and guilt and sin here are a little bit different. It has to do with intentionality. Did you do it on purpose? Did you not do it on purpose? An interesting question, for me anyway, is why do we have to make sacrifices for stuff that we did by accident? Right? A lot of times, the American law treats things differently, whether you did something on purpose or did something by accident. Jewish law, the same. There are different consequences, whether something was done on purpose or by accident. Why should people who do something by accident pay a fine, as it were, or offer something from their own prosperity in exchange for something that they did that they had no idea that they were doing at the time? And what was handed to me was that this is an educational tool, in the sense that, yes, the penalty is different if you do something by accident, unconsciously, but there's still a penalty. And the reason for that is to help us be more careful about those kinds of accidents in the future. You do something wrong that you didn't know was wrong. You discover that it was wrong. And you could just sort of walk the other way if there's no consequence at all. You may be, let's say, less careful about committing that kind of mistake in the future. But if there is an exchange or a penalty or a fine or however you want to characterize it, that's going to teach you to be more careful about these kinds of things. That's a mistake that you will not forget. We get to learn from our mistakes. Very rarely is Jewish thought about an all or nothing, black or white. There are rabbis who will disagree with me about this vehemently. However, Judaism doesn't see us inherently flawed from the beginning, irredeemable except by a messianic figure. But it doesn't say that any of us are perfect either. We are created in the image of the perfect God. However, each of us has flaws. Each of us has foibles. Each of us has regrets. None of us is perfect. But one thing that Jewish thought teaches us is that we are all perfectible. We can make up for those mistakes, right? And sometimes mistakes are an expensive lesson. Reminded this week that somebody once taught me that all good judgment comes from prior bad judgment. Right? If you you only become wise by failing. You only become wise by making mistakes. I mean, you can read books about wise people and get some wisdom from that, but I would argue that most human wisdom comes from unwise activity that we made a hypothesis about nature. We tested that hypothesis, went poorly. And then we learned that lesson and we became better. Did we become perfect? No. But that's a mistake we may not repeat again in the future. And we gradually get wiser that way. And the reason I'm talking about all these mistakes and perfectibility and tshuva, the ability to return to the path, is because that's what I want to focus on today, a specific set of circumstances for which we are called to give thanks, perhaps a little bit ironically. And so we talked about the olah, the burnt offering, the chatat, the sin offering, the asham, the guilt offering, the asham, the guilt offering. But there is another kind of offering that Parashat Tzav teaches about, and that's the zevach shlemim, right? Some would call this a peace offering because shlemim is connected to shin lamed mem, the root that has to do with peace, but also wholeness. So some people call it the shalomim peace offering. Some people call it the shlemim, the wholeness offering. But these are things that you make offerings for, not because you did something wrong, but because you are happy about something that went right. And one of these shlemim offerings is the zevach todah, or the offering of thanksgiving, right? The gratitude offering. And we're going to get more into that in just a minute. I want to pop over into the chat to see who is showing up for us. Susan says, has a arrow pointy thing. One of those vegans, welcome. It's a hard road to hoe, but it's makes kashrut a lot easier. I'll say that. Let's see. Edith says, yes, I don't like the offerings of the korbanot. Yeah, it's not for everybody. We've been talking about this for a little while in the Jew Curious community, that the idea of offerings of killing animals and sprinkling blood and burning up body parts and things like that, sorry to get too graphic there, but it's in the Torah. I'm just reporting it, not endorsing it. This sort of goes against modern sensibilities of, let's say, how to do religion. And Maimonides 1,000 years ago kind of felt the same way. He's like, why are these barbarians speaking lovingly of ancestors? Why are these people killing animals to talk to God? God made it very clear that God doesn't eat, doesn't have an esophagus or a stomach or any of those things, doesn't require sustenance from us. I think it's even called out in Isaiah that God says, like, look, do I have a body that I need to eat? And if I did need to eat, all the animals on earth are mine. All the plants and the grasses and everything is mine. Well, why do I need you to feed me? I can just go out and get what I want anytime I want, because it all belongs to me and I'm aware of all of it. Why would I need sacrifices? However, in the same passage, it points out that the sacrifices are not for God's sake, but for our sake. We don't do them to feed God. We do them to honor God, because it's good for us to acknowledge God with honor. And Maimonides' hypothesis was that when we came out of Egypt, we needed sacrifices in a sense. We needed a way to connect to this God that we have a now renewed relationship with. And the only way we knew how to do that from experience was watching the idolaters in Egypt make animal sacrifice offerings to their idols. And, chas v'shalom, I hate to think about this, even human sacrifices. And so God knew about us that the way that we knew how to talk to God effectively, in addition to prayer, was by making these sacrifices, taking some of our wealth and handing it over kind of in gratitude. and the increase of our field, the increase of our flocks. This is how we thought religion was done. And God decided that, if that's how they do it, if I take that away from them wholesale and say, hey, there's a whole new way of doing things, it might not have caught on. There would just be too much cognitive dissonance. As like, this is weird. We only know the sacrifice ways. So instead, God said, okay, you're going to keep your sacrifices. Not for me. I don't need it, but for you, right? To give you something to do effectively that you're accustomed to doing, but we're going to change it a great deal, right? Instead of sacrificing any animal you feel like, here's a short list of animals. Instead of doing it wherever you want, we're going to do it in one place. The place I cause my name to be mentioned. First in the Mishkan, then in the temple. And if instead of anybody can do it, it's just going to be the priests, right? People can bring sacrifices, but then the priests administer to that. And so significantly limited sacrifices, with the prescience that someday we wouldn't be able to do them. And some of us would be fine with that in terms of not having a temple. Some people are really still praying for the temple to be restored so that we can go back to the system. Whole movements of Judaism have kind of given up on this idea, saying like, look, we have a new way of connecting to God. We are rabbinic Jews, not biblical Jews. And study and prayer and meditation, prayer in a ritual sense, and prayer in a spontaneous sense, these are evolved ways of connecting with God. And so part of the transition there in the Pharisaic period was they said, okay, we're not going to do the sacrifices anymore. We are going to talk about them, right? This is our Torah. This is holy. This is worthy of study. And by studying them, it's as if we had made them. And even the prayer service today is structured around the sacrifices, right? We pray 3 times a day because there used to be sacrifices 3 times a day. We say extra prayers on Shabbat and holidays because there used to be extra sacrifices on Shabbat and holidays, right? And so some of these sacrifices and some of these prayers are communal by nature, right? We're praying on behalf of the community. Some of them are at fixed schedules, right? We do it because it's time to pray. But there has always been room for spontaneous expressions of prayer, right? Whether you are praising, whether you are apologizing, begging. I think my introduction to heartfelt prayer was when my first child was on the way, and I wasn't a praying person. I was one of these foxhole atheists, I guess you could say. This great event was coming that I had very little, I had some responsibility for, but very little control over. And I think one of my first prayers was like, I don't know if you're listening, but I don't know if anybody else out there has said a prayer like this. I just want this kid to be healthy, right? You can make him a troublemaker. You can give us all sorts of circumstances. Just help this kid be healthy, and I will do my best to take it from there. If you're listening, thank you. Peace, right? That's a very, very awkward prayer, but sometimes spontaneous prayer pushes us towards awkwardness, and that's okay. Today, what we're going to focus on is this kind of spontaneous expression. Doesn't have to do with the schedule, doesn't have to do with the timeline or holiday, doesn't have to do with a communal need. This is entirely about an individual coming with an offering to express personal gratitude, right? And so the Torah generally is a pretty concise book. The benefit of having kind of an oral tradition surrounding it, an oral law, if you will, that later gets redacted in the Mishnah and the Talmud and places like that, is that it's not always clear how we're supposed to follow the instructions. Some would say that it's intentionally not so clear because in different generations we will have to follow it in different ways. Right? And if it fixed a single way of doing things, then forever it would be that way of doing things, and we couldn't grow, we couldn't adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining our relationship with God and with the Torah. Right? But at this time, it says, make a Thanksgiving offering. It's not super clear why. What are we thankful for? I got a parking space. The waiter remembered that I like mayonnaise on my hamburger, right? It's like little thing. You can there is a Jewish custom of saying 100 blessings a day. We could say thank you all day long. We can observe miracles in our life and be constantly grateful for things large and small. But what was the occasion that specifically required this Thanksgiving offering? And it wasn't Thanksgiving. They didn't have that back then either in America or Canada. There was no America in Canada, as far as I know, back in the day. But I could be wrong. But so the rabbis take a look at this and they say, how do we know what engenders this kind of gratitude, this level of gratitude that you don't just say thank you, but you show up in a place with an offering? And it's a special kind of offering. It's not just the usual meat or meal, but it has additional pastries, let's say, associated with it. You bring cakes of unleavened bread. You bring wafers and things like that. And that's how you know it's a Thanksgiving sacrifice. So the rabbis take a look at this passage and say, you know what, this reminds me of another section that I was just reading. And it is from Tehillim, from Psalms, specifically Psalm 107, where the psalmist is talking about occasions of gratitude and lists 4 different big life events that would engender this kind of gratitude of not just saying thanks in your own head or out loud, but showing up at a place and bringing an offering. And the 4 kinds of things that this psalm mentions, the rabbis then put into the rabbinic understanding of the occasion for this sacrifice. And so the 4 things are these, and they are a sea voyage, a trip through the wilderness, Bamidbar. Like if you've been on a long sea voyage and you come back safe, you show up with gratitude. If you've been traveling in the wilderness and you show back up safe, that's an occasion for this kind of gratitude. Another is illness. If you have suffered an illness or an injury from which you have recovered, then you need to show up with this extra level of gratitude. And the 4th thing, which is a little, the first 2 are about travel, kind of out of your control to a certain extent, right? If you go on a sea voyage, you're probably doing that on purpose. But anything can happen. There's a lot of things that can go wrong on a boat trip. Sorry to scare you if you're going on a cruise soon, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong on a sea voyage. Weather, bad steering, I guess. You lose the map. Pirates were a thing even back then and today as well. But there's a lot of things that are out of your control. And if you survive this situation where so much depends on other people or natural events, and you come out okay, that's a reason for gratitude. Likewise, wilderness, if you are, what they meant by wilderness was sort of ungoverned country, right? Sometimes it's translated as desert, but it's not just the desert. This is a place where there are no civil authorities, right? Wilderness is defined as ownerless land, right? And so when there's nobody watching over you, when there's no kind of security, law enforcement, stable infrastructure, handy-dandy truck stops, if you go through this place and you come out okay, this is a sign, and nothing may happen. But if nothing does happen, or if something does happen and you survive it, that's an occasion for gratitude. And these are very similar. This is, journeys in places that you take on purpose, or maybe out of necessity, but there's a lot out of your control. Illness, you're not going anywhere. You may be, in your same house and catch cold, or you may have, things like cancer or genetic abnormalities that are deep in your system, out of your control. Some may say that some illnesses are within your control. If you're not taking care of your health, then you may suffer an illness because of that. But especially with the state of, let's say, medical science in the rabbinic period, things were a lot less likely to have good outcomes back then. And if you survived this circumstance, that was a reason for Thanksgiving. These are all a lot of things that are out of your control. And I set this up just to differentiate between this 4th thing that is a reason for gratitude, and that is if you have been imprisoned, right? And somebody who has been in a prison and has come out again whole, or has come out again alive, that is also an occasion for gratitude. Prison, in most circumstances, is neither a pleasant place nor a terribly safe place for people. Prisoners are treated in ways that, their human rights are less highly regarded than people who are free and walking around and have a choice of where to go that day. And so prison can be a dangerous place, just like illness can be dangerous, the wilderness or the sea can be dangerous. But I also want to call this out as sometimes when you're in prison, it's because of something you did. Right? This could have been, this is very much on purpose. This is a mistake that you made. You did the crime, and now you're doing the time. And some people may say, well, being in prison is not like an illness that just happens to you. It's not like a sea voyage where things can go wrong. But maybe it's people getting what they deserve or paying their debt to society. Can you give thanks after this? Like, I survived a situation that and look, we can get into wrongful imprisonment, policies that encourage mass incarceration, things like that. It's not always everybody's only their fault, and I understand that 100%. But this imprisonment does have a degree of personal responsibility in many cases. And so it may lead you to question, like, why would you give thanks for surviving something that you created that situation yourself? In those cases. Recently, I was having a conversation with some rabbis, and we were talking about this particular thing that we were adjudicating on a Beit Din. One of the parties is currently incarcerated, and somebody kind of overheard this and said, well, he's in prison. He's got all the time in the world. We don't have to rush. Don't necessarily have to rush on this. And one of the rabbis said, well, Joseph was in prison. Jeremiah was in prison, right? Being in prison doesn't make somebody a bad person. They may have done a bad thing or made an error that occasioned their being there, but let's be kind to people who are in a hard situation, because we know from our own history, from our own narrative, people are in prison for all sorts of reasons, sometimes rightfully and many times wrongfully. But in any case, when somebody emerges from prison, they make this same offering of thanksgiving. And so what I learned from this, again, we're in the picayune details. Okay, what's a sin offering? What's a guilt offering? What's this, that? Do I bring 2 bulls or 3 birds and 4 wafers of unleavened bread? Seems really detailed and picayune. But what all of these circumstances have in common is that these are typical or archetypal of some of life's greatest challenges that one time or another, I'm going to go out on a limb and say just about all of us face, right? These potentially existential events. Each of us, if we live long enough, praise God, we will run into one of these challenges, either voluntarily or totally against our will or totally accidentally. We are in situations where freedom is taken from us. Right? We are in situations where we are at the whim of the vicissitudes of nature or doctors or nurses or guards or tour guides, for good or ill. Right? These are situations where we may have gotten into them on purpose or in control, but where control is then taken away from us. And then when that control is back in our hands, what is our responsibility in that moment? And what Parashat Tzav is teaching us is that in that moment of restored freedom, restored control, restored capacity, restored health and safety, our first obligation is gratitude. Right? Things could have gone very badly for us. And if we don't take that moment to say, wow, I was out of control and now I am back in control, I have a second chance. I have a way of giving thanks for my safety. Maybe that sea voyage or wilderness travel opened up new opportunities. Goodness knows, the whole Torah, most of the Torah is about a journey through the wilderness, and let's say a sea voyage on foot through the Sea of Reeds. Much of the Torah was about our imprisonment in Egypt. The whole back 4 books of the 5 books is our leaving slavery, our leaving imprisonment, and the journey that we went on. And some illnesses. There are plagues along the way, right? There are plagues to start with, plagues along the way. We went through all of these things as a people. And when we study Torah, our ongoing practice is to learn from these exigencies, learn from these near misses, right? Purim was a near miss like this. We almost didn't make it, and then we did. Let's put on costumes and eat triangular cookies, and don't forget to tell this story to our children and our friends every single year. And so my firm belief is that Parashat Tzav is coming to teach us whenever you have a challenge in your life, whether you caused it or you fell into it, whatever the source of that challenge, if you get a second chance, you need to see this as an opportunity for growth. How can I work to prevent illness in the future? How can I mend my ways or work for a more just and equitable society so that I am not imprisoned again, or that people I care about, or that countrymen are not imprisoned again? How can I make sea voyages safer? How can I make the wilderness safer for other people? Having survived that, maybe I get to be a guide. Right? If you survive a trip through the wilderness, there is no better qualified wilderness tour guide than you at that moment. And so whenever you have a big, and like there are small challenges in life, just like there are small things to say thank you for, there are small things, right? I stub my toe sometimes. I'll admit it. I'm clumsy, and sometimes it's dark. We have small gratitude. We have small gratitude moments. We have big gratitude moments. We have small pains, and we have big pains. This is teaching us that no matter how big the pain and the challenge is, if you come out on the other side and you have the wherewithal to do something about it, you pause, you give thanks, and that's how we learn, and that's how we grow. And that's what I wanted to teach you this week about Parashat Tzav, is that you can look at all of life's challenges as opportunities for growth. And what helps that is pausing to give thanks for the life that you have, where you are right now with what you have right now, and say, how do I grow from this? And how do I help other people grow and be safe? So I want to take a moment to say hi to the people who have shown up in the chat. We have somebody saying, I'm going to share this with my son who's incarcerated right now. I really appreciate your sharing that, and that there are people in hard situations. Right? There's prayer, there's work to be done, there's gratitude to give, and I really appreciate your calling this out. We got Fernando coming in on the chat saying it's a rainy day here, Kathy. We've got Fernando giving everybody a Shabbat Shalom. I'm so grateful for this. I'm so grateful for the people who showed up today. I'm sorry, a little bit bad radio right now, I know, but I'm going over the chat, and I'm really stopped. I'm speechless that we have people in this community supporting each other, people dealing with the issue of incarceration and being incarcerated, and having this as a touchstone for hope. Just really humbles me in this moment. So I'm a little bit verklempt. I'll say that. So I want to see who is in the live stream today. Once again, we have Grycicle, we have Milo is here. Fernando has given us another shout out from the NYC, or as we say it in the salsa commercials in Texas, New York City. Steph asks, can prison be taken in a metaphoric as well as a literal manner, someone who is experiencing spousal abuse? So absolutely, prison can be an actual prison. It can be a metaphorical prison, whether physical abuse, emotional abuse, sometimes financial abuse, where people are withholding resources from one another. We are imprisoned in all sorts of ways. And somebody was asking me in one of my classes the other day, I kept using the word redemption or redeeming, talking about God as one who redeems. And there's sort of a wide semantic feel here. Redeeming, it's not like redeeming a coupon, right? It's like I've got 10 cents off bread. I'd like to redeem that now. The word, as it's often used as the Torah, is redeeming a person, redeeming a captive, like paying a ransom or rescuing somebody who is in a hard situation. And, and time and again, our narrative is one of God or people inspired by God helping people out of captivity, or messages from God to captives saying, yes, it's terrible right now. I am with you. God willing, there are people on our side as well to help you out. It gets better. It can get better. And I'm not advocating that anybody endure difficult situations on purpose, just waiting for God to make a miracle. But I am saying that this imprisonment can be a physical imprisonment, a literal captivity, or somebody could be trapped in a bad relationship that is literally, physically, or emotionally dangerous for them. Some people can be trapped in their own heads. And maybe that's the wrong way to talk about, let's say, depression, right? This is a physical illness that manifests in the feeling of being trapped or frozen or unable to change or unable to do something about it. And I'm not glossing over this. I'm speaking from personal experience here. And so there are all sorts of ways in which we can be trapped or stuck. Our word for Mitzrayim or Egypt is our word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which literally means the narrows. And you can look at that as geographically, Egypt was a narrow country. It was just surrounding the Nile. But it also tells us that sometimes we have to go through tight places to get to the other side. And that redemption from the captivity of slavery was us coming out of this tight place, of this narrow place, into a broad, free situation of abundance. And so you can look at any situation of imprisonment as a physical imprisonment, an emotional imprisonment, a relational imprisonment. And when we get out of those places, we stop, we say thank you, and then we figure out how to grow from those experiences. Let's see who else is in the chat with us today. All right. Listen up, heroes. I really, really appreciate your joining me for this live studio recording of the Jew Curious Show. And if you are listening on the podcast, hero, thank you so much for listening to this show, for participating. Some people have been participating in the chat. Other ways that you can participate is, let me back up a little bit. I know this is less of a, I got a little frog in my throat. Purim's been an exciting week, and this is a little bit less held together than other broadcasts. But I'm really grateful for people learning with me at all times. We've had a fantastic week learning about Purim. We've had a fantastic week talking about Jewish denominations yesterday. If you are just tuning in for the first time, you should know that we had a great discussion live yesterday. I think it went about 80 or 90 minutes on the history of the modern Jewish denominations, some of their similarities, some of their differences. And so feel free to check that out. Very soon we will be talking quite a bit about Passover. There is a teaching from the Shulchan Aruch when it starts listing all the rules of Passover. First rule of Passover, start studying Passover 30 days before Passover, because there's so much to do, so much going on there, so much to understand about that story that we really got to start reviewing well ahead of time. Passover, sorry if this spooks anybody, Passover begins 4 weeks from tonight. And so in the Jew Curious School right now, we are learning about Passover in a 4-week mini course. I'll also be talking about Passover on this YouTube channel and in the podcast, as well as we prepare for this reenactment, this reliving, this experiencing of the Jewish master story of liberation from captivity, and our gratitude and our learning from that. So I think it's intricately related to Parashat Tzav in that sense. So With that, we are going to dive into the outro of the podcast, some sort of canned stuff that I say at the end of every podcast, just to get everybody on the same page and to always end in gratitude as well. Once I sign off with my final piece, feel free to stick around in the chat. I will hang out at the chat as long as people have questions for an hour or so. And again, I really appreciate everybody showing up for this live studio broadcast. I think it keeps me on my toes. It makes for a better show. And I'm super grateful to see everybody not only chiming into the chat, sharing their references, but also supporting each other in really touching and beautiful ways. I've had rabbis and other people in the Jewish community sort of challenge me, how is it possible to create a real Jewish community in a purely digital environment? And my answer is, boy, I could tell you some stories, how I have seen the Jew Curious school and the Jew Curious community, people bind together, people support each other for high fives and hugs and an ear and a shoulder when it's needed, as well as just joshing around, just joking around and bringing joy and connection as well. So I'm going to jump right into the outro. Hero, thank you so much for listening to this podcast today, to our discussion of Parashat Tzav. This has been episode number 33 of the Jew Curious Show, which means that you can find it in the show notes, which means that you can find show notes to this episode at jewcurious.show/episode 33. Once more, that's jewcurious.show/the word episode, the number 33. I also want to make special mention one more time that today is the one. I also want to make special mention one more time, as my teacher and friend Rabbi Ron Goldberg told me, today is the 1-year anniversary of the release of my book, The Promised Life, my first book. Let's say it that way, but I should write another book. And you can learn more about that book, learn more about the 7 most important Jewish practices for me, how I adopted them in my life, how they changed my life, as well as some practical steps you can follow to try them out for yourself. You can find that at jewcurious.show/book. That's BOOK. And finally, I would be most grateful if you take the opportunity to give us a review on iTunes. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what this show has meant to you, what you have learned. You can do that by going to iTunes, typing in the word Jew Curious, and that's how you'll find this podcast, and then giving it the number of stars of your choosing. And if you will, a few words of your honest review. Not looking for shills out here, just want to know how this show is really impacting people so that we know that we're on the right track, how we can improve, and this helps other people find out about it as well. If you would take time to let us know how we're doing, I would be, as we say in Texas, much obliged. And until next time, hero, peace. All right, I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer. We got 18 people still watching on the chat. This is phenomenal. So I feel blessed to have Kathy here, to have Milo here, to have Teresa here, to have Ruthie here. Thank you so much for sharing yourself and being a part of this community. Edith, nice to see you. And let's see, I think we had a couple of new faces here as well. I see Bud Rod is back from Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. And Steph, Fernando, thank you for being here. Man alive, as David Letterman would say. I am over the moon as to how well these live chats are going. If you have any tips for me besides drinking more water ahead of time, John, and getting through Purim in one piece, I'm just going to say the punch was a little strong this year. I'm not encouraging overindulgence. I will just say you just don't mix that much schnapps with pineapple juice, in my opinion. We did have a Hawaiian themed thing, but the sangria was a bit much. Not knocking. If you made the sangria, I'm sorry. It was delicious, but the word subtle doesn't come to mind to describe it. So in any case, really thrilled everybody showed up. Hopefully we've learned a little bit together about Parashat Tzav today. I really like doing this every Friday right before Shabbat, having a talk about the Parashat Hashavua. If you've enjoyed learning with me in this live setting, we're doing about 5 or 6 of these every single week. I love connecting with Jew curious people every single day. If you feel like you can't make it, if you're late or whatever, don't stress out about it at all. It's my commitment to show up. I'm delighted with whoever comes to learn with me and to share yourselves, share your Torah. Good to see you here, Milo. Good to see Fernando and Steph. Everybody is always welcome here, and especially when it's a nurturing community like this one has been. So for everybody watching in the live studio audience, thank you so much for learning so much great Torah with me this week and for sharing yourselves as well. And I'm going to just make sure there are no more questions. If you have any more questions that I haven't answered that I've kind of skipped over or missed, feel free to throw those into the comment section. One last favor to ask is if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. There's a little, pictures down there. There's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. If you didn't like it, give me a thumbs down. Really, I want to know that this is going okay. But if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. I'd be much obliged. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel so that you are automatically notified every time when I schedule these. You'll know about them. We're going to start talking probably quite a bit about Passover next week, as well as the Parashat Hashavua and whatever topics people share with me that they really want to know about. In the last couple of weeks, we've had, I'll say, probably our most watched, in any case, videos have been about Jewish denominations, which is a question. I just did that because I get that question a lot. Last week, we had what I felt was a really great discussion about LGBT people and their welcomeness, or their, what's the word? How we welcome them in the Jewish community. And that was phenomenal. But again, just based entirely on people asking me those questions over and over again. So if you have questions, come into, there's the Jew Curious Show has a Facebook page. If you want to take it to the next level, we have a Jewish Community Center, which is a private Facebook group, just so I can keep all the trolls out and make it a more safe place for discussion. So jump in there. Let me know what you want to know about. And as time unfolds, I'll teach some things that I want to teach, but I also want to make sure we're answering the questions that real Jew-curious people have. So give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, jump into the Jew-Curious Community Center, and if you haven't heard about my book, check it out. I'm not going to push any, I'm not going to shill it too much, but it was a great journey for me to write it. I share a lot of really personal stuff about my Jewish journey in there, so check that out. As well as you can see members here of the Jew Curious School. And this is a school that we have where we get together up to 3 times a week to study Torah, but that's not even my favorite part. My favorite part is the community that we have built around this learning of people sharing themselves, being supportive of one another, sharing resources, books, recipes, all sorts of things, but also giving people a hug when they need it. And I think this is especially critical for the people who I found who are drawn to Judaism, drawn to Jewish study, but maybe don't have physical access to a rabbi or a community where they are, or some people do, and they feel anxious about those kinds of spaces. So I wanted to make a place where everybody could feel welcome. So with that, thank you. Let's see, people are congratulating Curtis. So let's see what people are congratulating Curtis about. Curtis Brown, really enjoying the videos. Currently converting to Judaism. Mazel tov and b'shah tova. Curtis, thank you for being here. I'm glad this is being helpful for you. Elizabeth is popping in, just caught the end of it. Seems like you're ending. My luck again with timing. So always happy to see you, Elizabeth. Feel free to watch the replay. And anybody who wants to know when these things are, they're always scheduled ahead of time on YouTube Live, and you can see. All right. So I think with that, I'm going to sign off for Shabbat Shalom. We got a day, I got a kind of a day to plan for. Going to put this out in a podcast episode. Big stuff going on in Pasadena this weekend. If anybody's watching this and has access to the Pasadena community, Pasadena Jewish Temple and Center, I will be helping the Cantor lead services there tonight at 7:30, I believe, and then tomorrow morning at 9:30. It's going to be a good time. So with that, I'm going to peace out and just wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, a Shabbat of gratitude, and a Shabbat of peace.